Recap in minutes. In today's video, we will be enjoying a crime drama thriller film, entitled A War. There will be spoilers ahead, chill out and enjoy. The movie begins with Dolly Squadron patrolling south of Adam Khan Kili, Pakistan. Forming a single line, they enter a vineyard cautiously, trying not to step on a mine. Nearing the end of the vineyard, Anders, a young soldier, steps on an IED, blowing himself up as the rest of the squad drops to the ground. After the explosion, the medic immediately rushed to Anders' aid, whose legs were blown off. Trying to save his life, they perform CPR, but after a few tries, Anders dies of blood loss. That night, Company Commander Claus meets with his officers to discuss the incident. When he asks them about their concerns, they all say their casualties bring down the company's morale. They also mention that they don't see the purpose of doing patrols, other than being targets for the enemy. After listening to their concerns, Claus dismisses them except for Najib, his second in command, to who he asks for feedback. After giving it some thought, he decides to lead the next patrol himself. In the morning, Claus talks to the company in the briefing room. He affirms and acknowledges all their concerns. But he tells them that the patrols are necessary to obtain civil trust and establish their presence against the enemy. Meanwhile, at Claus' home, Maria, his wife, and kids Fiend, Julius, and Elliot wait for Claus' call together at the dinner table. When the time passes for him to call, the kids give up and watch TV instead. Later that night, Claus still calls home. Maria picks up the phone and talks to him privately as she smokes a cigarette. She asks how he's doing as she notices something wrong. He then confides in her about losing a young soldier, who was only 21. The following day, Claus wakes up to a crying Lasse, Anders' friend, begging to be sent home. Lasse confesses to switching places with Anders and feels guilty that he died in his stead. He then tells Claus that he's no longer useful as a soldier because he lost his will to fight. After collecting himself, Claus tells Lasse that he can't send him home. However, he offers to put him on guard duty for 2 weeks, and gives him a satellite phone to call home for him to relax and calm down. Later that day, Claus and his squad patrol the town nearby. The children and the villagers happily welcome them. They thoroughly sweep the area and avoid as much unnecessary contact as possible. As they turn to a corner, they hear an argument. They rush to see Ritter, a soldier, and a villager yelling at each other. They call in the translator, Stoffer, and find out that the man is begging for help, since his daughter burned her arm and cannot get any help. They enter the man's house, still cautiously creating a perimeter around it. Claus checks the situation inside the room and confirms the injured girl. He then calls Stoffer and the medic to start treating the child. He then offers to take the child to the camp if her condition worsens. Before sunset, Claus and Stoffer talk to some locals asking about the Taliban. The man tells them that the Taliban come and go in their area, for they usually leave when the soldiers arrive. Contemplating their options, Claus offers to make a deal with the villagers. They will help with the well and water problem in the village, if they help the soldiers locate the mines that the Taliban placed. An offer that they instantly accept. As the sun sets, Claus sits in the camp and calls his family. While talking to them, Najib arrives and joins in. After some time, Najib excuses himself, prompting Claus to end the call. The next day, Claus and his squad find an IED beside the road near some children playing. Not wanting to set it off and harm the children, he orders his men to wait as he calls for the sniper team. He then orders them to watch out for anyone suspicious who will retrieve the bomb later that day. A few hours later, the snipers on top of a hill finally spot their target. The enemy on a motorcycle stops and walks to the children. He then lines them up in front of him, using them as human shields as he retrieves the bomb. After retrieving the bomb, the enemy takes one of the children as a hostage and drives off. He only releases the child after thinking he's far enough from the soldier's sight. However, the snipers calculate his move and take the shot once the child is out of danger, instantly killing him. That night, the squad returns to the corpse and takes pictures of it for evidence. While collecting the evidence, Claus sparks a conversation with Morris, the sniper, on how he will tell his child how he killed the enemy. The team responds to him in a joking manner. Meanwhile, Maria talks to Julius about his day, but suddenly gets interrupted when Fiend calls for her because Elliot swallowed some pills. She panics and rushes to them. That same night, Maria and the kids rush Elliot to the hospital. Upon arriving, the nurses quickly administer treatment to him. Elliot then cries out for his father, as Maria holds his hand to comfort him while the nurses do the procedure. The next morning, Claus tries to comfort Maria over the phone, and expresses his wish and longingness to be with them. Unfortunately, the line gets cut off due to the bad signal. Later that day, a man from the village and his family come to the camp to seek refuge. The Taliban threaten them, but Claus could not help them at the moment and turns them down. However, he promises to return to them the next day, thus, the family is left with no choice but to head back. The next morning, the squad waits on the outskirts of the town, which seems to have been deserted. Seeing no threat in the area, Claus forms a small team to rescue the family. Claus and his team sneak into the man's house, even calling out to the family, but they hear no response. As they cover for each other, Claus enters with Lasse and finds the family dead. Still in shock from losing his friend, Lasse leaves to get some fresh air outside. Claus notices Lasse's reaction and orders Michael to take him back to the rest of the squad while the others investigate. Moments later, explosions and gunshots are heard as Lasse gets shot in the neck, forcing them to take cover by the well. Claus then rushes to their aid and drags Lasse back into the compound to get treated while the enemies continue to bombard them. After that, Lasse's condition worsens as he starts losing more blood. The medic does his best to keep him alive, while Claus calls for a rescue helicopter. He also calls for an airstrike to cover for them. A few days later, Claus shows his men a video of Lasse recovering after the incident. Lasse, unable to talk, uses written cards to communicate. He jokes with his fellow soldiers about not missing them, and not eating bad food. He then thanks Claus for saving his life, and reminds the men to always care for each other. At the playground, Maria talks to Ulla, a friend, and shares her concern about Julius frequently getting into trouble. She admits to Ulla that it's hard without Claus, and struggles the longer he's gone. The next day, Najib rushes to Claus while he's having breakfast. He informs Claus that Commander Martin is in his office with 2 judge advocates. Unsure why the commander would be there, he rushes to them. Inside the office, Martin inquires about Claus' last mission. He then gives Claus a choice to answer, but may be charged with a crime because civilians were involved in the incident. Wanting to clear things up, Claus agrees and begins with the deposition. Later that night, the men of the camp are also interviewed. Martin calls for Claus again and tells him he is being charged with 11 civilian deaths, due to the air support he called in from their last mission. He also informs him that they are sending him home. That same night, Claus packs his things and is then escorted by military police out of the camp, leaving to settle the case back in his homeland. The next morning, Claus meets with a lawyer to discuss the charges against him. The lawyer tells Claus they have no chance of winning, unless he confirms that he had PID on the enemy. Inside the car, Claus argues with Maria because he believes he's guilty of the crime and wants to serve his sentence. However, Maria reminds him that he has children that need him too. A few days later, at the courthouse, Maria and Claus enter the courtroom. Lasse, who is in the crowd, shakes Claus' hand before Claus is brought to his seat. Later into the day, the prosecutor shows the court the pictures of the mutilated victims, and a video feed from one of the soldiers' helmets. The prosecution pressures Claus to confess, but he thinks of his family and calmly follows the story they made up. He then speaks like a soldier with pride, to make it seem believable. A few months later, Claus' men are also called to testify. During this time, none of them can confirm or deny that Claus had the PID, forcing the case to continue. 6 months later, Butcher is put on the stand. A nervous Claus sits and looks at his fellow soldier as he expects the worst. To everyone's surprise, Butcher claims to be the one who gave Claus the PID. Agitated, the prosecution pries into his silence for 6 months but cannot find any evidence to remove his statement, forcing the court to reconsider his claim. A day after that, Claus and his family spend the day at the beach. He tries to take his mind off the case, and enjoy their time together as they skip rocks in the sea. On a Thursday, Claus returns to the courthouse for the verdict. Maria and Claus' men sit and watch, waiting for the judge to read it. As they anxiously wait for the verdict, everyone listens, as the judge declares that Claus is not guilty of the charges made against him. After hearing the verdict, everyone in the courtroom cheers as Claus is acquitted of the charges, finally, letting him breathe a sigh of relief. The movie ends with Claus sitting on a chair, smoking, and relaxing in his backyard. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more videos like this, and help the channel grow.